Hi guys, this is Srini Sethuraman. After a long time, I'm coming back with some of the infrastructure side of the AWS. Today we are going to talk about the cloud formation, how the infrastructure as can be created easily, right? Um, so the intro is basically it's a declarative way of defining AWS resources. For example, if you want to have a security group, right? I want to have two of the EC2 machines, two of the Elastic IP. I want to have a S3 bucket, ELB, and whatnot, right? There are 224 AWS resources, and you could define it in a declarative way. Then CloudFormation creates those for you in the right order with the exact configuration that is specified. See, that is the power of the declarative way of creating the infrastructure, right? Um, so let's see. I'm going to cover some of the base concepts so that at least we'll know what is a parameters, right? Parameters are a way to provide inputs to your CloudFormation template. They're important to know if you want to reuse your templates across the company, right? Then parameters are the great way to go. Some inputs cannot be determined ahead of the time, right? So in that kind of a situation, the user has to decide while trying to create the resource from the template. Then parameters are the great way to go with. So when exactly use? Is the CloudFormation configuration likely to change in the future? Yes. Then make it as a parameter, right? So even if there is a slight doubt, making it as a parameters makes you not to change the whole template. You just have to provide an input to the template. Okay, how do you use it? To reference the parameters, there is a fn double colon ref function can be leveraged to reference the parameters. Parameters can be used anywhere in the template. That's the beauty. If you're using a YAML way, this is the shorter version, right? So I think YAML is making the whole verbose JSON into more concise thing, and they even improved the syntaxes along with that, right? The function can also reference other elements within the template. So now we know what is a parameter. Okay, this is the meat of the CloudFormation resources, right? Resources are the core of the CloudFormation template. They represent different AWS components that will be created and configured. Resources are declared and can be referenced each other, right? So that is the beauty of it. So for example, you have Elastic IP and you have EC2. Elastic IP should be there first, then you refer that in the EC2. Yeah, all you have to do is declaratively you define the tags and refer each other. During the runtime, it knows it has to create the Elastic IP first, then the EC2, and so on. There are 224 types of resources, and it keeps growing, right? Resource types identifier are part of the pattern, like AWS AWS dash product dash name data dash type dash name, right? So we are going to see an example soon, but there are so many of the 224 types. I cannot cover all those things, right? But there is a very good documentation given here, right? Under user guide, AWS template resource type reference, if you go, right? If you just Google it or just click this HTML, it will take you, it will give you exactly what you have to do. There are some optional attributes for the resources. Depends on, very useful to draw the dependency between the two resources. For example, only create ECS cluster after creating an auto scaling group, right? So if you really want to make sure some of the dependent resources are created first, then the next resources, then better to use the depends on. By default, the template itself takes care of it, but to get the even more doubly make sure, it's better to use this depends on attribute. Deletion policy. So, for example, if you're having S3 resources and so on, right? So, and if your EC2 is referring to the S3, you don't want to keep on removing the S3. So, protect resources from being deleted, even if the CloudFormation is deleted. Or the ODS is a great example. ODS you don't want to keep on deleting because it could be reused later. So, in that case, you have to make this deletion policy equal to true. Similarly, creation policy, more details is in the CFN init. Um, so this is used when you are trying to do a auto scaling group, those kind of things. It will be useful. The creation policy will be useful. Metadata, anything you want to get creative, you could do with this. We are not going to touch more on the CFN init. It's more advanced concept, but it's good to know that you could do a lot more with CloudFormation template. Even though it's a declarative template, this there is a CFN init way. It gives you lots of rooms to make sure you create your dependent software within the EC2, for example, right? First you have to have the web server, then you might want to add an app server. So if you want to do those kind of things, you could do anything, and the CloudFormation will wait for the whatever the software steps you have mentioned. Then only it comes back and saying I'm completed, kind of a thing. So this is kind of configuration management within the AWS resources you could do through CFN init. Mappings. Mappings are fixed variables with your CloudFormation template. Okay, they are very handy to differentiate between two environments, dev or prod, or regions or AMI types, right? So usually you give mapping one, key. It's kind of a three level if you see, right? Mapping 01, key 01, under that name and value. Example is US East 1, then you could say 32-bit means this is the AMI, 64-bit means this is the AMI. So it's almost like a list of values, but with two levels. So you could say region, under the region, if it is US East, and if it is a 32-bit, then choose this to that level of thing, so that you don't have to hard code things, right? When to use mapping versus parameter? Parameter we saw already, right? The users can choose. But mappings are great when you know in advance all the values that will be taken, so that you don't have to ask the users to kind of choose. It's once they choose the, for example, US East 1, and based on that we could infer the AMI, right? So like region, availability zone, AWS account, environment, etc. They allow safer control over template. Use parameters when the values are really user specific, right? So, for example, if there are a set of VPCs, and if you want to create EC2 for a specific VPC ID, we don't want to put it in the mapping, right? Because I want to give that control to the user. Then it belongs to the parameter. But so we have two variations basically, right? How to reference it? Here you use find in maps, right? Using this, you return the name value from a specific key. Okay, conditions. Conditions are used to control the creation of resources or outputs based on condition. So you could put the condition either on the resource or on the output. We are going to see output what it is, but yeah, so you could conditionally say if it is dev or if it is dev, create this particular type of EC2. If it is prod, you could say you create this type of EC2. So you could create that level of things. Each condition can reference each other parameter value or mapping. So each condition can reference another condition, parameter value or mapping. So that is where it's more powerful. You could bundle whatever we learned so far, so that when you do a condition, you could say based on the parameter value or mapping also you could do. How to define the condition? Usually you use fn : and equals if not or. So these are all the possible ways you could put to get the thing conditions. And there is one more very good thing called F1 colon get attribute. Attributes are attached to any resources you create, so that it adds more like a name value pair tagging kind of a thing. So through attributes you could do those kind of things. So it's kind of part of a condition. Okay, so there is something called outputs. So outputs sections declares optional output values that we can import into other stack. So before I talk deep dive into output is nothing but, for example, you have one stack and you want to refer that value in the other stack, so that you don't want to keep on creating security group or VPCs in every stack. You just want to keep it in a separate stack and refer it in your resources, right? How to do it? So outputs is one way of doing. There is a nested stack that we are going to discuss later. So output section declares optional values that we can import into other stacks. You can also view outputs in the AWS console or in using AWS CLI. They are very useful. For example, if you define network CloudFormation and output the variables such as VPC ID or subnet IDs, right? It is the best way to perform some collaboration cross stack. So you let export handle their own stack. So how to cross-reference output? So we use something called F1 colon import values function. Okay. So far we covered the theory part. So I will cover the practical things in subsequent slide. See you soon.